Hi there. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. If you're new here, well then, welcome. I'm glad you've joined us. And if you've been here for a while, I can't thank you enough. I am so pumped about today's episode because I think it is highly important for those of us who want to be the best version of parent that we want to be, which, well, basically is all of us. So what topic would that be? Well, that is forgiving our own parents for the wounds or grievances or traumas or even just notions and philosophies that they have passed on to us that we may not necessarily feel are aiding us in our development. And we will also talk about how that process helps us become better parents ourselves. Let me ask you something. Have you ever caught yourself in a moment with your kids and you thought, oh no, I sound just like my mom or my dad? Maybe it's the way you reacted when you were stressed, or something that you said that felt like it came straight out of their playbook. Or maybe you've noticed the exact opposite, that you're bending over backward to avoid doing things the way that they did, and yet it still feels like their influence is still there, shaping how you parent in ways that you don't fully understand. Making you do things not because you're intentional about them, but just because you don't want to be like them. It's such a complicated thing, isn't it? Our parents gave us so much, some of it good and some of it hard. And whether we like it or not, we carry those experiences with us. Sometimes it feels like those old wounds or unmet needs sneak into how we show up for our kids, and even in how we see ourselves as parents. That is why I wanted to have this conversation with you today, because forgiving our parents isn't just about making peace with the past, it's about lightening the emotional load that we carry so that we can show up for our kids with more intention, with more love, and with more clarity. It's about breaking cycles and healing old patterns so that we can parent from a place of choice rather than just reaction. Now, I want to make something clear from the start. Forgiveness does not mean pretending that the hurt didn't happen or invalidating yourself or that everything was okay when it wasn't. Forgiveness is about you, about freeing yourself from the weight of those experiences that you had to go through, so that they don't control your parenting journey and so that they don't continue hurting you subconsciously. And you don't have to do it perfectly or all at once. This is a process, one small step at a time. And part of the process is you resisting feeling like if you forgave them, you would be giving them a free pass. That is also part of it, but I do want to help you move forward from that by explaining what the real beauty and what the real treasure is for you in forgiving them. So grab a cup of coffee or whatever it is that makes you feel all comfy and warm inside and get settled, because we're diving very deep into what it means to forgive, to heal, and to truly move forward, not just with our minds, but with our hearts. And not just for ourselves, but for our kids and for the benefit of our entire family, including the relationship with our partner. So first, I want to begin with unpacking our past, and specifically our relationship with our parents, which carries so much weight in how we parent today. Whether your childhood was filled with warm, loving moments, difficult ones, or a mix of both, those experiences do shape us. They leave imprints on how we see ourselves, how we react under stress, and how we connect with others, including our kids. For most of us, our parents were our very first teachers. They taught us either intentionally or unintentionally, how love is shown, how boundaries are set, and how conflict is handled. And even if those lessons were subtle, they became part of our inner blueprint, that lens, as I like to say, through which we now see ourselves as parents and how we respond to situations. And of course, not all of these lessons are going to be serving us well. For example, if you grew up in a home where love was conditional, where you felt like you were valued only when you behaved in certain ways, when you performed, when you achieved, or when you were able to take care of someone, be the nurturer, or when you put yourself in the background so that others would shine, then you might struggle with perfectionism, or you might feel unsure of how to parent with unconditional love, even though you want to love your children unconditionally. On the other hand, you may have been raised in a household where emotions weren't talked about, and now you might find it hard to create an emotionally open environment for your kids despite wanting to do so. There's pressure. Moms, speaking to you, you might feel this silent expectation to be the perfect parent, like the weight of generations of motherhood is on your shoulders. Maybe you see echoes of your own mother's struggles or the ways she sacrificed her needs, and it's hard not to repeat those patterns, even though you're trying to carve out a different path, even though cognitively you know that there is a different way and that potentially it's a much better way. You might be drawn to do the things the way you saw them be done because that's what felt right. That's what felt normal. And that is what felt good because that's familiar and that is what came from mom. And as I've said before many times, in childhood, our parents are like God. So anything that they do becomes ingrained and it becomes a rule. And even though as we grow up, we start to understand that some of these rules aren't general, but very, very specific to our family dynamic. And even when we know that they are not serving us, we might find ourselves repeating them. And dads, for you, this might look a little bit different. Maybe you grew up with a father who showed love through providing, but wasn't emotionally available. That is something that I see quite often. Now, as you try to be more present for your kids, you might feel unsure about how to do that. Or you may even worry that you're somehow failing if you're not living up to the traditional ideas of being a provider. So there may be this dilemma of, am I not doing the right thing? And am I, on a way deeper level, betraying generations of fathers in my lineage by doing something different? Am I not man enough for not putting my sole focus on providing? And on the other hand, you may be feeling that pull, but not knowing how to truly show up in that way and be present because it's not something that you've witnessed. It's a lot, isn't it? And so here's the thing. Those feelings of frustration or sadness and even anger that you may feel toward your parents, well, they're valid. They don't make you ungrateful or unloving. They don't erase all the good things that your parents have given you. What they do make you is human. But when those feelings remain unprocessed because it's shameful not to be grateful to our parents, because it's not okay to have grievances from those who did their best to raise you, and because there's a lot of guilt involved in admitting certain things as if it's only black or white, and admitting that certain things weren't optimal for you means that your parents were the worst of the bunch. Well, what happens then is that these feelings will creep into our own parenting in ways that we don't intend. Maybe we snap at our kids when we're stressed out, just like our parents did. Or maybe we find ourselves overcompensating, trying so hard to avoid being like our parents that we end up feeling exhausted and, in essence, disconnected from our children. This is why understanding the weight of our past is so important, because until we name and acknowledge these patterns, we're carrying them with us, often without realizing it, and we have no control over them, no power. But the good news is, once we start to see them for what they are, we can begin to let go. So I think you're beginning to understand why forgiveness matters, why it's such a big part of breaking these patterns moving forward. I want to reiterate something that I said in the very beginning. Forgiveness isn't about letting your parents off the hook. It's not about pretending that our parents did everything perfectly or about ignoring the pain they may have caused. Forgiveness is about you. It's about reclaiming your power and deciding that your past doesn't get to define your future or your kids' future. When we hold on to resentment or anger toward our parents, it's like carrying around a heavy backpack. Imagine it like full of rocks. Every time we react to our kids out of frustration or fear or anxiety, we're adding another rock to that bag. Forgiveness allows us to take those rocks out one by one and put the backpack down. It gives us the emotional freedom to parent from a place of intention rather than reaction. In that same light, these rocks could be emotions that have been pent up toward our parents or from our inner child toward our adult self, whom it may blame for not having stuck up for them. All of that pent-up emotion can be removed rock by rock or even pebble by pebble. The beautiful thing about forgiveness is that it helps break cycles. If your childhood was marked by criticism or neglect, if you felt like you were emotionally distant from your parents, you have the opportunity to create something different for your children. But that is very hard or nearly impossible to do when we're still carrying the weight of our own pain. Forgiveness helps us heal. It will help you heal so that you can model healthier behavior for your kids. And let's not forget to point out the benefits for your own well-being, because that's what happens first, and then that is how it trickles down into your parenting. When you are able to forgive, you are letting go of emotional tension that keeps you tied to the past, which opens up space for joy, connection, growth. You're giving yourself permission to rewrite the narrative, not just as a parent, but as a whole person that no longer has to be defined by these wounds, no longer has to hold on to that anger and the resentment in order to be able to set boundaries or to feel empowered. As you're listening to this, you could be feeling great resistance and that it may seem like it's impossible after what you've been through. There are some really dark stories that I have heard. There are certain cases where even a person on the outside would hear the story and they couldn't fathom the fact that anyone could ever forgive these parents for those acts of neglect or abuse, whether that's emotionally or physically or otherwise. But we hold such great power within us. And let me tell you, when cases like these do reach forgiveness, you can see a transformation like you've never seen before, a feeling of lightness like you've never experienced, a glow, a freedom that is apparent on the outside for those who are witnessing this person change. Because it's suddenly like they let go of chains that had been holding them down and exhausting them and hurting them for ages, long after they were removed from the unpleasant or abusive situation that they were in. And yet, having said that, it really is okay to feel like forgiveness right now isn't an option, at least at the moment. Forgiveness isn't about rushing the process or forcing yourself to feel something that you're not ready for. It's about taking small, intentional steps toward healing, steps that we're going to explore in just a moment. So let's go into what exactly is this process that leads us to forgiveness? Forgiveness is a deeply personal journey, and it will look different for everyone. So it can get tricky when I'm trying to discuss this on a podcast. But even though there's no one size fits all approach, there are some steps that we can all take and apply to our own situation in order to start untangling the emotional knots that are tied to our past. Based on what I've seen is most helpful, I've broken down the process into 5 steps that you can very easily adapt to your own pace and your own situation. The first step in forgiveness is understanding the patterns and messages that you've absorbed growing up. Think about what you've learned from your parents, both the positive and the painful. How was love expressed in your family? How were mistakes handled? What were the unspoken rules about emotions, boundaries, or conflict? Now, the problem with holding on to anger and not forgiving, like I said, is the fact that we are stuck in the past. And I know that this first step sounds like I am leading you there to dwell on the past, or that I am asking you to find someone else to blame for your situation, something that a lot of people have an aversion to. They feel like when we start discussing the past and childhood more specifically, that we are looking to excuse certain things and lift the responsibility off of ourselves so that then they feel disempowered. But this is nothing like that. This is about seeing clearly where certain patterns or beliefs came from so that you can be the one who decides whether they're serving you or not. So it's actually a very empowering process. For example, if you find yourself feeling overly critical of your kids, you can ask yourself, did I grow up in an environment where criticism was common? And if so, how did it affect me? How did I react when I was criticized? What did it feel like? In what situation did this usually happen? What are the patterns that I can find? How did I respond? And now that I think about it, in what ways has this stayed with me? Moving on to step 2, this is where we acknowledge the hurt. And of course, this is often the hardest part. A lot of times when we try to break the shackles of resentment and the grudges that we hold, we try to skip over the pain. But forgiveness is actually about facing it, allowing ourselves to feel the sadness and the anger, the disappointment, the resentment that comes from unmet needs or past wounds. We need to process the grief of realizing that our parents couldn't give us what we needed, or the frustration of seeing how their struggles affected our childhood. We cannot forgive until we face the feeling that we have worked so hard to suppress. This step is especially important because unacknowledged pain will not disappear. It shows up in other ways, like how we parent, how we react under stress, or how we see ourselves. We may numb ourselves, and that could be through abusing certain substances, that could be through overeating, that could be through scrolling endlessly on social media or watching TV, just being disconnected from ourselves and from our partner and from our children that we so want to be present for. Giving yourself permission to name and feel your emotions can be incredibly freeing because you are letting them be and you are then letting them go. Whatever is unprocessed shows up in different ways and grows substantially so that it can be seen. Acknowledging it, on the other hand, will allow it to stop festering, and it will allow your inner child to feel validated so that it can finally feel seen. Step 3 now is understanding context without excusing behavior. This step is about shifting perspective, basically. Try to look at your parents not just as mom or dad, but as people with their own struggles. Our parents had and have fears and limitations. Were they dealing with financial stress, their own unresolved trauma, cultural or societal expectations that shaped how they parented? Understanding context doesn't mean excusing their harmful behavior. It simply helps you see the bigger picture. For instance, if your dad was emotionally distant, it might help you to know that he grew up in a household where vulnerability was seen as weakness. This doesn't erase the pain that he caused you, but it can help you release some of the resentment by recognizing that his behavior wasn't about you. It was what he learned. At this point, I do want to make a small note because I do have a lot of times the exact opposite person in front of me, the person who over excuses behavior. So they think that they're being understanding and they think that they have forgiven their parents because cognitively they have gotten to a point where they can understand all of their parents' past and they can sympathize or even empathize with them and say, I get it. I get why they did the things that they did, and I get that they loved me, and I understand that it all came with good intention. And so what that does, however, is excuse the behavior. So this is why I said understand the context without excusing behavior. It's a very, very important caveat because when you find yourself saying all of these things, but they had it very rough and they did the best they could and they're a better version than their own parents. While that is all true, I never question my clients when they tell me this. I take it as a fact. If they say it, it's true. And in most cases, it really is true. Our parents are better versions than their own parents and the parents before that. However, when we get to that cognitive level without having acknowledged our emotions and validated our inner child for what it's had to experience, what we're essentially doing is we are invalidating ourselves. It's as if we're saying the behavior is okay because it could have been worse or because they had it worse and did a better job or because the intention was good. Well, if I lean over to give you a helping hand because you've fallen, but then I trip and I fall on your hand as you've given it to me and I break it. Now, this was very well intentioned, but I still broke your hand. So understanding the context, my good intention may help you forgive me, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I broke your hand and that you need to feel the anger toward me that maybe I may have been reckless. And I wasn't in a position to help you when I offered to help you. I didn't realize the dangers or that I wasn't in a place potentially to help you. You need to feel the frustration of having a broken hand that can't do the things that it needs to do for a while. The disappointment in having surrendered to receiving support and then having that happen to you. You need to feel all those feelings, even if they feel irrational. So you may be thinking, this is very irrational. Why would I think all those things? You were meaning to help me. You couldn't have predicted what happened. You fell, you broke my arm. I mean, okay, it's awful that my arm is broken, but I know you did it out of good intention. Who would actually be angry at you and who would actually be feeling this mix of emotions over something that was accidental? This is exactly how a lot of people react when we get to talking about their parents. That part of them that has internalized their parental voices comes forward and says, it's irrational for you to think this way. Your parents did their best and they became better and they struggled so much. And imagine if you had struggled this much, would you have been even close to providing what they provided for you, whether that's financially or that's emotionally? And so what this does is it shames you into submission, into saying, yeah, they were good. They were good considering the context and the circumstances. That's an excuse. Understanding the context, therefore, is about knowing where they're coming from, knowing that it's not personal, but also being able to validate your own emotions and say that despite all of this, I still felt this way, and that's okay. It doesn't make me a bad person, and it doesn't make me ungrateful. It doesn't make me irrational. I felt that way nonetheless. Going back to the example with the broken arm, well, she was well-intentioned, she was well-meaning, she was trying to help. She did better than those who walked past and didn't offer their hand. Still, I'm allowed to feel angry and frustrated that I'm going to be wearing a cast for the next month and I won't be able to do basic things that I love or are necessary in order for me to carry out my daily activities. They're not mutually exclusive. Those can exist at the same time, and so can your feelings about your parents. You can love them and adore them and be grateful to them, and also recognize that they effed you up in certain ways. Step 4 is to choose what to keep and what to let go of. Once you've reflected and acknowledged the hurt, it's time that you take your power back. This step is about deciding which parts of your upbringing you want to carry forward and which ones you want to leave behind. Think about the values or lessons that your parents instilled in you that you appreciate. This is the time to do that after you've validated your feelings and you've acknowledged them and you felt them. So maybe your parents taught you the importance of hard work, or they showed you resilience in tough times. They showed you generosity when they had very little. Hold on to these things. Maybe they instilled in you the value of family and staying connected, even though at the same time they may have done things that made you feel like love was conditional. It can happen. For the patterns or behaviors that don't serve you, make a conscious decision to let them go. So just as you're making a conscious decision to maintain certain things that you admire and appreciate and find significant, make the exact same decision to let go of the other things that didn't serve you. You've brought them to the surface. They are no longer in your subconscious. And in order for them not to crawl back in, you need to make a conscious decision to say that these no longer serve me and they have to go. Knowing that there may be parts of you that will resist this process because they may feel like you're betraying your parents. They may feel like you either take it all or you take nothing. You either appreciate it all or you appreciate nothing. If you start to change and carve your own path in certain respects, you are betraying your lineage and your parents and all of what they did. And as irrational as it may sound, it's important to make sure to pause and answer to that fear and say, no, they did better than their own parents because they also decided to leave certain things behind. And those things that they couldn't leave behind are the things that hurt me. And so whether they can express it or not, all parents want their children to be better versions of themselves. So even if they can't, I give you permission to decide on the things that you get to keep and the ones that you improve, that you decide to break the chains and leave them be. And others may be tempted to make this sound simple, but it isn't. And I think it's clear. However, it is worth it because it's such a profound act of self-awareness. It's saying, I get to choose how I parent. I get to write a new story for my family, which, admittedly, you may have been saying thus far, but you may have been finding yourself being affected by deeper forces that you couldn't pinpoint. This is about knowing the deeper forces and having power over them so that you say it and you reflect it. And step 5 is taking action toward healing. This final step is about taking intentional actions. For some of you, this might mean having an honest conversation with your parents, if and when that feels appropriate. Maybe it's about expressing how certain behaviors impacted you, or simply letting them know that you're working on forgiveness. But forgiveness doesn't always require reconciliation. For many, it's an internal process. Journaling, in this case, can be a powerful tool. You can write letters to your parents that you don't intend to send, or explore your feelings in a safe, private space. Therapy, of course, is another incredible resource, giving you a structured environment where you get to process the emotions and build tools that are appropriate for you for moving forward. Others, forgiveness might be as simple as repeating to yourself, I release this. I won't let this pain control me anymore. It can take time, and that's okay. Forgiveness, like most things in life, is a journey, not a destination. And again, I want to acknowledge from where I'm standing how difficult this can be. For you, the moms, you might feel like the weight of your own mother's legacy is on your shoulders. The sacrifices she made, the expectations she placed on you, or the ways in which she struggled. Forgiving her doesn't mean that you will agree with all of her choices. It means that you're releasing the emotional burden so that you can parent in a way that feels authentic to you. And for you guys, the dads, you might be navigating your relationship with a father who found it hard to express love or show up emotionally. Forgiveness for you might mean redefining fatherhood on your own terms, choosing to be both strong and vulnerable for your kids, knowing now that vulnerability is its own kind of strength. That is a powerful way to break cycles and create something new. And of course, your relationship with the other gendered parent may have affected you as well. You may have noticed that I'm speaking to moms about their own mothers and the legacy that they're holding from their own mothers, and to dads about the legacy that they've been given from their fathers. That's not to say that we aren't affected by the other parent, but usually what happens is that if we are mothers, we tend to parent more like our mothers, and we tend to carry more weight on our shoulders from our mothers. And the same goes for dads. They will be very much affected by the father figure because that is the role, that is the identity that they are claiming. That doesn't mean, however, that there aren't things to resolve for men who have become fathers in regards to their own mothers. So if you're a dad and your mom didn't love you unconditionally and that has left a wound, that could be affecting you as well. In this instance, for example, if your mom showed you love every time you were performing in school and in other activities, but she was very disappointed when you weren't at your peak performance, then you may have learned that love is conditional. And so as a person, you may feel like you need to always be performing. And this may have led you to be a perfectionist and a very high achiever and very focused on work. And as you become a father, there may be a part of you that really wants to be present with the kids, but that realizes that this doesn't bring a reward usually other than, some pats on the back. You fathers get more pats on the back for doing certain things. For mothers, it's a given. But other than that, for someone who has felt like love is only provided when they have some outcome to show for themselves, well, parenthood, you'll see the outcome many, many years down the line. It's not very rewarding in the short term, the sense of being able to show something for it. It's rewarding in many other ways in the short term, but for those who are seeking to show something for their work, it's not. And so there may be a conflicting side where you may be thinking, how come I really want to be present, but then I end up being at the office until 10 o'clock at night and I never get to see my children except for like Sunday morning. How can I claim that I want this? And how can this bother me so much? It's not just that I'm lying to myself. I'm emotionally distraught by the fact that I don't see my children as much as I want to. But then my actions don't show it, and my partner doesn't believe me, and my kids obviously don't see me, so they're not getting any of the benefits. They may not even know how much I want it because I'm not there, but I really want to be there. So what's happening? Well, that is what is happening. And so the same example could be used in reverse for you, the moms, with your father. We tend to take on the identity, the role of mother from our own mothers, and we tend to take the role of an identity of father from our own dads. However, we are very much affected by both of our parents in the way that we are as people, and the grievances and traumas and wounds that we carry as people will, if unresolved, affect how we parent anyway. So as we begin to close this conversation, I want to focus on the ripple effect that forgiveness can have, not just on you, but on your family. The work of forgiving your parents isn't only about healing your past, but it's about transforming how you are in the present and the future that will deeply benefit your children, your partner, and your own future self. That ideal that you may strive for. Let's explore what that looks like. When you take time to work through your emotions and forgive your parents, you're modeling something incredibly powerful for your children, that it's okay to face hard feelings and to grow from them. Kids learn by watching us. And when they see you acknowledge your pain, when they see you process it and move toward healing, they're learning how to navigate their own emotions. You're showing them that emotional growth is a lifelong process and that it's possible to love someone even with their imperfections, while still holding space for your own needs and boundaries. This is like giving them a template for handling their own relationships now and in the future. Then again, forgiveness allows you to step out of reactive patterns that may have been passed down through generations. Like I've said before, when you don't address the pain of your past, it will show up in certain ways in your parenting. It could be through repeating your parents' behaviors or overcorrecting in ways that leave you drained and essentially disconnected from your kids. But when you forgive, you're consciously choosing to parent differently. You're breaking cycles of criticism, emotional distance, unrealistic expectations, and this creates a healthier, more nurturing environment for your children. One where they can thrive emotionally and truly feel seen. And like I alluded to before, forgiveness can also impact your partnership. When you're carrying unresolved resentment or pain from your upbringing, it will spill over into your interactions with your partner, even if you think you've contained it. If you really think about it, you might find that you've been projecting old wounds onto your partner, or that you may struggle to communicate openly because of patterns you learned as a child. So many people have learned that respecting your elders means not addressing your emotions, not addressing things that bother you, not vocalizing your needs. So when they get into a relationship, they have been conditioned not to talk about their needs. And so we may, quote unquote, blame our partner for not communicating well, but they haven't been taught that communication is safe. In fact, they've been taught that communication is completely unsafe. It brings you in a very awkward position at the very least, or in a very explosive situation that you may not feel like you're able to handle. As a child, if you had a parent who would explode and yell and then blame you and guilt trip you when you expressed a grievance or a need or something that didn't reflect the family standard, you weren't able to defend yourself. In fact, explosive parents terrorize their children into silence. But even parents that aren't explosive and give the silent treatment, that is just as bad, because what the child learns is that I am undeserving of love when I express my boundaries or my needs or things that have hurt me, things that I need to be done differently. So as you work through forgiveness, you create space for more honest, compassionate communication because you become more aware of these triggers and hopefully express them to your partner. Describe that context that we were talking about, not excusing yourself, but explaining where you're coming from so that you are better equipped to respond rather than react, and so that your partner can also find a way that you both have decided mutually to stop you in your tracks gently and say, hey, I know where this is coming from. What's triggered you right now? How can I help? You can see that this not only deepens your connection with your partner, but it also helps create a united front for parenting when the both of you feel supported and valued. Moving on, one of the greatest gifts that you can give your children is that sense of emotional security. When you've done the work to heal your own wounds, you're better able to show up for your kids with patience, empathy, and presence when they will come to you and express their own needs and boundaries and grievances. You're less likely to be reactive or overly harsh. You're less likely to feel hurt that they had the nerve to come and tell you these things. You're less likely to unconsciously get into that role of the elder parent who needs to be respected by being spoken to as if they're the ultimate expert who knows everything. And you're more likely instead to approach parenting from a place of calm and of confidence, of not being shaken by these things. This doesn't mean you'll never lose your temper or that you will never feel overwhelmed. Parenting is hard after all. But when you've addressed your own pain, those moments of frustration are less likely to be fueled by unresolved emotions from your past. Instead, you can respond to your kids in a way that meets their needs without compromising your emotional well-being. Your children will feel this shift. They'll sense the emotional safety you're creating, and that safety allows them to explore the world, build confidence, and trust your relationship with them. Finally, forgiveness opens the door to more joy in your parenting journey. When you're not weighted down by the weight of the past, you have more emotional bandwidth to enjoy the little moments, those messy, beautiful, everyday experiences that make parenting so meaningful, those short-term rewards that I was talking about before. Instead of feeling like you're stuck in a cycle of reacting or overcompensating or overcorrecting, you can be present with your kids in a way that feels authentic and connected. Because forgiveness isn't about being that perfect parent who has no childhood wounds anymore and can be the gentlest of the bunch. It's about freedom. And that freedom allows you to embrace the highs and lows of parenthood with a sense of peace. So, in wrapping up, I want to reflect on the journey that we've been on together. We talked about how forgiving your own parents is one of the hardest and most deeply personal things you can do, but it's also one of the most transformative for you and for your children. In summary, we talked about the weight of our childhood experiences, how these patterns show up in our parenting, and the freedom that comes from breaking those cycles through forgiveness. I want to remind you that forgiveness doesn't mean excusing hurtful behavior or pretending that things were fine. It instead means acknowledging what happened, understanding the context, and deciding to let go, not for anyone else, but for you, your partner, your children, your family. And finally, what I want to say is that it's a process. It doesn't happen all at once. Some days forgiveness might feel within reach, and other days it might feel completely impossible, and both are okay. What matters is that you take small, intentional steps toward healing at your own pace, knowing that you're bound to backtrack sometimes, and that that's part of the process. So, for those of you keeping a journal and wanting to take the next practical step, like I said, the first thing that you can do is to name what you're grateful for and what has brought you pain. So if you feel inclined, set aside 10 minutes to reflect on your relationship with your parents this week. Write down one thing that you're very appreciative of that they instilled in you and one thing that caused you pain. If it feels right, share these thoughts with someone you trust, a parent, a friend, or even with me. And if you want to take me up on that offer, you can find all the ways that you can get in touch with me in the description wherever you're listening to this. Well, if today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it. What's one thing that you're working on when it comes to healing your past? Comment if you're on YouTube or send me a message, reach out on social media. I'd love to support you in your journey in any way that I can. Thank you for spending time with me today. Forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself, and in doing so, you're giving your family the best of you. Until next time, just remember, you're doing an amazing job. See you next Sunday.